we'll go over chapter 4 today, talk about job analysis, and if we get done a little bit sooner, then we'll end a little bit sooner, just because I'm not feeling 100%. But I'm good enough. If my accent is bad anyway, so now stuff knows it's even more difficult to understand me, but it's all right. Well, we have 18 people here. Does anybody have any questions before we get started?
No, just I hope, Professor, you feel better soon.
Thank you, Samia. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's one of those Alabama curses. It's very, very humid over here. So
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's raining here also in Long Island, so I think it's a very wrong weather in the fall time.
yeah, and it's kind of been weird this summer anyway. And but at least we don't have all of the rains and everything that you've had up there. I mean,
Right.
New York was kind of flooding. That
Yeah, yeah,
hurricane.
for sure.
Yeah, we haven't had any hurricanes this season, which is
Oh,
kind of amazing.
right.
But it's in the city especially, it's really, really tough when it gets that way. Long Island also, can be tough. I used to live up there in New York. So
Oh, you did? Okay.
yeah, I
Good
used to
info.
work for State University of New York.
Okay.
So I mean, I didn't live in a city. I lived in Oneonta, but there was nothing to do in Oneonta, so I came to the city almost every weekend.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's get started. There's 20 of you over here. Again, I hope that everybody's doing well. Let me start sharing. There. Okay, well, let's talk about job analysis and talent management process a little bit. If anybody has any questions at any given time, just feel free to kind of interrupt me. And it doesn't have to be just me talking, but I also don't want to want to kind of stay focused on track, so that we can get most of this material covered. So yeah, we'll talk about talent management and what talent management oriented managers do, and we'll talk about job analysis. Really, I mean, it's everything that we do in human resource management in some ways is tied to job analysis, and I'll explain that to you in a minute why that is. And then we'll talk about how we conduct job analysis, how it's done, and ultimately how we write job descriptions, because that's why we do job analysis, to write job descriptions and also job specifications, which is what is needed to be able to do that job. And then we'll talk about competency-based job analysis, because that's where a lot of these things are going. A lot of companies don't hire for specific job; they hire for specific competencies. For example, interesting article that I just read last week or this week, from Inc. magazine. They talked about what it takes to get a job with Apple, and Apple, they have a very, very sophisticated interview process. And interestingly, in Apple interview process, what they want to hear people saying as part of the interview is 3 words: I don't know. And that's actually really, really clever, because when you think about it, when you go to a job interview, intuitively you would think that the last thing you would ever say is I don't know, because that would imply that you can't do the job. But in reality, Apple, they want people to be able to say I don't know and have courage to say I don't know, because the honest truth is that for every single one of us there is something that we don't know. And if you can admit that it is that you don't know something, then what you are saying is that you can't learn. You don't know how to research and investigate answers. You don't know how to turn around and ask somebody. So what Apple wants is they want people who are curious, intellectually curious, who are willing to ask questions, are willing to learn and research things to get better at things. And so in some form or fashion, they want people to be able to have the courage to say, I don't know. So it's an interesting sort of characteristic that they are looking for. And ultimately, ironically, it's competency. The competency of being lifelong learner, being curious, being creative, being researcher. Those are competencies. So okay, let's get at it. So talent management process. It seems so maybe trivial, but it really kind of isn't. Hold on a second. I need to open the door. My wife thought that she will help out by closing my door to the office because she's vacuuming, but now my dogs are inside my office and they're trying to get out there, so they are pushing the door. So, so again, so you want to decide what positions to fill. That's important first and foremost, and then you want to turn around and build a pool of job applicants. It sort of is interesting, like I said earlier, that it seems so trivial. We decide what position to fill. No, this isn't going to work. I can hear the voice, so hold on a second. I did have to close the door after all because there's too much noise there. So sorry about that. So yeah, once you have decided what positions you want to fill, then you build a pool of applicants. Then you, of course, you obtain application forms and use variety of selections tools. We talked about that a little bit already, and that there are certain selection tools that you can and cannot use. There are certain, like, clinical tests cannot be used because they are used for clinical purposes in psychiatry, psychology, and they are not allowed by law to be used. And so, of course, your selection tools have to be ethical. They have to be fair and equitable to everybody. And by the way, application form, many times people will ask and say, well, why do you have to fill a form? Aren't I already giving you the resume? So, everything that I'm going to write on this application form in terms of my educational background, my work background, etc., I'm going to be writing on that application. So why don't you just read that for my resume? And the reality is that the reason why application forms are filled is that at the end of the application form, there's some small print that basically says, by signing this form, I will allow the company to do a background check on me, this and that and whatever. So they really just want your signature there. They want, everything in one document, and they want your signature there, because by doing that, now you're verifying that everything that you've said is true. In a resume, you're not signing your resume and say everything that I've said in this resume is true. So also there are questions based on, disability, veteran status, race, those kinds of things that are asked in application form. And so they want to be able to get that over with as well. So there are many, many reasons why application forms are still being used. It is a little bit of a nuisance because many people say, why do I have to, like I said earlier, why do I have to fill this again? Because I'm just giving you this resume. And so many application tracking systems, ATS systems, they automatically scan your resume. But of course, if you have a complicated, complex resume, then your resume won't fill all the slots correctly, and you have to go back and kind of fill up all of that information yourself. So I believe that as technology gets better, all of these tools get better. But we are kind of in that strange place right now where everybody has some sort of ATS system, but they don't always function perfectly well. But anyway, going back to talent management process, then you decide who to make the offer, and then you orient, train, and develop employees, appraise employees, and compensate employees. So talent management process is really a sequential process where certain things have to happen in certain order, and if one thing isn't done right, it'll impact everything, after that. That's why job analysis, and we'll talk about job analysis today, is so important, because if you don't know what decisions to fill, you can't even start this process. And so workflow analysis, job analysis, that whole process is done to understand what type of jobs are there that needed to be done, and to create kind of a flow of work. So for example, if you are owner of a restaurant, you have to kind of think of flow of value flow. How does a customer come into a restaurant? What type of people there has to be. So you have to have a hostess first saying welcome to the restaurant, taking the client, the customer to the table, and then from there on, the waitress or waiter takes over, takes the order, takes it to the chef. Chef is going to make the food, bring it to the table, and all of that. So there's a sequence of people that have to do certain things, for that customer to be served. Every job is that way. There's a certain workflow, and certain people have to do certain things, and somebody's going to have to turn around. Let's write a organizational chart, got to identify everybody's jobs, and let's hire right people for the right things, who have the right skills. And that's what we are talking about today, is how complicated that can get, because you also want to write jobs that people want to have. There is a model called job characteristics model. In organizational behavior, we talk about it a lot. Every job has to be something that people feel have some job identity. They feel some autonomy. They feel sort of some empowerment and some ownership of the job. And so if you don't instill certain psychological criteria into all jobs, then these are jobs that people don't want to do, and you can't hire anybody. And then, of course, you have to figure out how to pay them correctly for that job. So all of that gets really, really complicated. And it all starts from job analysis. Luckily, though, we have, again, software to use it. Human resources, information systems, software have talent management modules in them that help to coordinate these activities in some sort of kind of meaningful way. And so it's still the theory and the technique is same behind it, but it's just kind of automated a little bit more. Let me take a sip of coffee over here. So, job analysis, what is it? It is simply the procedure through which you determine the duties and skill requirements, reading from the slide. Obviously, you can read it yourself, but it is a process of creating jobs. It is a process of understanding what tasks are performed, what type of things are happening in that particular job, and what skill requirements there are to do that job. So when you're doing job analysis, the very important thing is to remember is that you are not investigating or analyzing the person doing the job. This is not about how well you are doing the job. This is about what does it take to do the job well. This understanding the job, not the person's performance. And but that's important to mention that, because when you start analyzing jobs, the most obvious thing would be you ask the person who is performing that job currently in order to document what it takes to do the job. Well, that person may not be totally and completely honest about those duties and tasks and requirements, because they may feel like they're not doing some of them well. So if they're not doing it well, they don't want to mention it, because they don't want to highlight the fact that they may not be doing it well. So you have to be real careful when you do job analysis based on just asking people who are doing the job, because again, they are afraid that their own performance becomes questioned. And so it's important to emphasize to those employees that it is not about them. It is about the job. It is about understanding how to make that job better. Again, going back to the job characteristics model, if you don't write jobs that people want to do, then they don't want to do them, right? And if you don't pay them well enough for that job, then they don't want to do them. And so, but if you haven't performed job analysis, then you don't have job description, written document of what the job entails, and job specifications, which are, certain competencies and abilities that you need to have in order to complete that job. If you haven't analyzed those and you don't have those, then how are you going to measure how you're going to pay one job over another job, and how are you going to pay each job appropriately? It isn't just about how much you want to get paid and how much I can afford to pay you, although those are factors as well. It's certain jobs you can pay more than others because they require higher level skills, and also equipment, all the support, everything else, and how everything kind of works together in organizational structure. Without job analysis, you couldn't do any of it. So job analysis really is sort of the fundamental key activity that has to be happening. And so now somebody could ask and say, well, isn't that something that you've done once? And so if you already have done job analysis once, why would you need to worry about, you've done it once, it's all done? Well, jobs change. Everybody's jobs change. Maybe not in a restaurant or a grocery store. Some of those kind of traditional type of jobs that are relatively stable kind of industries, the jobs may not change that much. But even in those jobs, yes, they do change. There's technology that's going to be introduced. There are new things that's going to be introduced, so they do change. But then some jobs, they changed a lot. They changed a lot throughout the years. So corporations will hire people who are job analysts, whose full-time job is to always analyze jobs, is to change job descriptions. I wonder how many of you, for example, have a job description that A, you don't remember reading it last time, B, doesn't correspond to your actual day-to-day tasks. It's just perhaps outdated, because that's very common. People, they don't hold their job description in front of them every single day. Maybe they should, because at the end of the day, that's what it should all go back to. But because of the changing nature of jobs, most corporations, companies, firms are not able to keep up with those job descriptions that frequently. So the basics of job analysis, those job components that I like to call them, obviously the work activities. What activities goes into work? What type of tasks are being performed day to day? We'll talk about this a little bit more in a few, but in some jobs, the activities are pretty clear. They're very observable. But then in some other jobs, it's a little difficult. So if you would be observing me doing my job, here I'm talking to a computer screen. So you would now have to, be able to look into my computer screen to realize, oh, I'm talking to a group of people, and, kind of read the information to kind of say, well, this is what I'm talking about. But if you are observing it from the distance, you would not be able to really understand what it is that I'm doing. Versus if I would be mowing the lawn out there, you can see me mowing the lawn, you can see the physical activities that are happening. So easily you would be able to say, okay, work activities include pushing the lawnmower, or something like that. So those human behaviors, there are physical behaviors, there's less physical behaviors. So some of them are more observable than others. And those type of things have to be taken into consideration when you're observing. So observing versus asking and interviewing people, depends on kind of what job you are analyzing. And then, of course, machines, tools, equipment, and work aids. What type of tools people use, what kind of machines they are using, what kind of equipment they need to be using. Many office jobs, all you see is somebody sitting in front of a computer. So that's easy. But you have to dive deeper to be able to say, okay, what software? what is exactly needed for them to do their job. So today's managers have to understand the specific information technology requirements for every single job, specific information access privileges for every specific job, and those types of things. And even goes to the point that where we have to look into certain specifications of computers. What I'm doing right now, I can do with my MacBook Pro over here easily. I don't really need anything sophisticated. But if I start doing instructional design, I do video editing, and I do some creating, learning sort of aids and items that require some graphics or whatever. Then obviously I'm going to have a computer that has more RAM and faster processor or things like that. These are the kinds of things that have to be analyzed, because you do not want to just give everybody the top of the line computer. It's to be very expensive. So you want to make sure that what jobs require what level of computing power, so that you can buy the right kind of equipment to everybody. And it's a pretty significant thing, because you can buy a computer for $200 versus $20,000, depending on how much power the computer has. And so you certainly don't want to buy everybody $20,000 computer if they don't need it. So even for office jobs that only require sort of regular standard computers and basic software, you still want to think about those things. Performance standards, you have to, although when you're doing job analysis, it isn't about the performance of that person. You do have to analyze what the performance standards and metrics would be that you would use to analyze and evaluate somebody's performance later on. So a well-designed job is also a job that actually is easily appraised or evaluated when you actually have somebody doing that job. So you kind of build the evaluation into the process, so to speak. So that's important. And then you have to look at the job context. It's very important, the job context, what type of clients you have, what type of customers you're serving, what type of sort of job environment you have, and the whole context to analyze that. Because even though you have side by side two jobs, they are doing very similar kind of activities. How you want them to conduct those activities, what kind of attitude you want them to have, and a lot of nuances depends really kind of on the context. And the industrial context of that becomes very important. Different industries require different kind of a flavor, if you will. So it's important. And then, of course, lastly, human requirements. What are the requirements from the humans performing the job that are required? What characteristics, qualities, skills, KSAs we call them, knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are required for somebody to perform this job. Any questions so far? Makes sense? Has anybody ever done this job analysis? I mean, are you familiar with any of it? You have any stories that you want to share? Yeah, this is a fairly specialized HR type of a thing, and it's maybe sad or disappointing to say that many companies actually do not do this really well. They just kind of wing it. They just kind of go and Google some job descriptions and say, okay, well, this is how it should be, and they just kind of list something. And it's organizations that even don't really have job descriptions, and like I said earlier, if they do, they haven't been changed with times. And this is not something that is often understood really, really well. But companies that are really well performing, sophisticated, larger companies, you bet they have this done. And they have a department doing this full time all the time. Now, what do you use a job analysis for? And why would it be important, especially for larger corporations? Well, for one, recruitment and selection. As I said earlier, how can you recruit somebody if you don't have a job description? If you don't have a document saying this is what this job entails, it's impossible for you to turn around and recruit somebody for that job, because a person is going to look at the job announcement and they're going to look at if they're going to be a good fit for that position. And if that job announcement isn't based on job analysis and based on solid job description, then there's no way that you can communicate to anybody that this is what kind of person you are looking for and this is what you want that person to be doing. Also, how are you going to select the person? I mean, if you don't actually have criteria. I have seen situations where people in the room interviewing a job candidate really have no clue what the job description is. So they are just kind of basically just asking questions and kind of like, well, determining whether they like the person or not. Well, liking has nothing to do with it. I look like a mobster, but that doesn't mean that, I'm mean or anything like that. You may not like the shape of my nose, or you do not like my accent or like my personality, but it has nothing to do with whether you should hire me or not. Because it isn't about liking, it's about, can I do the job? Do I have those job specifications, the KSAs? And that's what the interview questions should be specifically based on. But too many times, managers go into interviews and they haven't thought about what they're going to ask. They're kind of like, well, just tell me about yourself. Why do you want this job? And, they don't have anything specifically designed. If you have multiple people in a room, sometimes companies bring multiple people in a room because they feel like, politically speaking, sort of in organizational politics, those are the people who should be kind of in a room, for that specific title or that specific position. But it's not so much that they have coordinated the questions. If you have a team interview, it should be coordinated. You should have structured interview where you thought about it before and say, you're going to ask these questions, you're going to ask those questions, and you have figured it out. And they're going to ask those exact same questions from every applicant. And then you have a rubric that you measure and you rate and rank everybody according to the same way. So none of it is subjective, I like you, I don't like you. It's basically planned through. And so this is why job analysis is important, because if you have a well-done job analysis, then everybody involved in the process, it's easy time for them to be able to do the interviews, the selection, recruitment, and also EEO compliance. We talked about that. It's difficult to be compliant with all of these things, and you want to be making sure that you have a good job analysis. Just think about something in an interview process. So maybe you are the person who, for whatever reason, you're the team member who is given the task to go greet the new employee, the candidate, the applicant in the lobby of your organization and walk them to the interview room. Or maybe you're the person who walks them to the next interviewer or something like that. And during that time when you're walking in a hallway, that person or getting an elevator, you kind of there and you say, hey, how you doing? And so you may chit chat, you may casually, do some discussions, whatever. And, you may ask, something like, you may get in the conversation casually about kids. You may ask, do you have any kids? Because you just want to be conversational, and you want to have that discussion. You want to relate or something. Say, oh yeah, I have 2 kids. How about you? How many kids do you have? Well, wait a minute. You can't ask job candidates whether they have children or not. You cannot ask them those kinds of questions. Those are, because then if that person doesn't get the job, then they could easily turn around and you did not give me the job because I disclosed that I have children, and you don't want people who have children to have these jobs because you want them to be able to travel, and you think that I'm not available to travel because if I have young children, the children are going to get sick and I'm going to take sick time a lot and whatever. And reality is that some job places, they do discriminate against people who have multiple children. Or, if they are young women and they're planning to have children, or something like that. So that's just one little example of something that you could ask somebody casually, and you don't mean anything bad by it. You're just having a conversation. You just want them to feel comfortable, and you just want to get that conversation. But it happens in although it's not in an interview room, it happens as part of that process, and the person can turn around and use it against you. So now you just violated EO. So those kind of things, again, have to be thought through, because everything you're asking the employee, not an employee yet, but the candidate, the applicant, it has to be specific to that job. And how you're going to do that is that you're going to make sure that everybody focuses on the job description that is based on good job analysis. So also performance appraisal. Later on, if you do hire that person, how are you going to appraise them? How are you going to evaluate their performance if you don't know what it is that they're supposed to do? I mentioned that already before. Kind of compensation, same thing, as I mentioned many times before now. You don't know how you pay somebody and how you pay some pay raises or whatever unless you have analyzed what it is that somebody needs to be doing. And training. How are you going to train somebody if you don't know what it is that they're supposed to do? And I mean, I'm sort of emphasizing all of this, and some of you may be thinking, well, this is common sense. But when you go to organizations, you realize that none of these things are not happening. Companies give training, but they really don't have any idea what it is that, employees really need training on. It's sort of all over the place in many places. Compensation, there's no logic of why somebody gets paid this or that. It's basically whatever that person negotiated when they got the job, and whatever the job market was at that given point and what the urgency was. There may be a lot of people in the same type of a job having very different pays. So there are some organizations that really are that bad. Now, not all companies are that bad, but it's just like from one extreme to another, I guess. So, how do you go about doing this then, conducting this job analysis? Well, you are, first you identify how the information will be used. Will the information be used? Again, like I said, you have to communicate that and explain this to people that are going to be involved in job analysis very clearly, so that they feel comfortable that you are not going to be using this information to evaluate their performance. That's a different process. This is about the job. So somehow you need to identify how the information will be used, be transparent, be honest, and communicate it to everybody involved. And that way they can feel kind of a little bit more comfortable about the process. And, you need to understand the relevant background information, historical factors, how certain positions came about, how, why is it needed and why is it done this way, and just kind of everything. What is the supervisory structure? What is the overall organizational structure or overall organizational culture? Those are the types of things that you need to kind of sort of understand. And often, if you have a very large organization, you kind of can't analyze every single job all the time. So you kind of select these representative positions that become sort of anchor positions. And then you can kind of go, up and down from that in sort of requirements to kind of fine tune it. And so, you do that. If you have a type of a position that you have different levels, like for example, professor, for example, there are different professors. You have lecturers, you have instructors, you have assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, so and so on. So they're all basically doing the same thing, but there's nuances of how certain skill sets need to be needed a little bit more from a full professor than somebody who is starting as an assistant professor. So you would basically have one representative position, and then you would based that ranking, you kind of adjust based on that, so that you don't have to do every single job, analyze every single job separately, if that makes sense. And then of course you collect and analyze data. You verify that data to make sure that it's valid and reliable. and you don't just rely on one person saying that. You ask multiple people from different angles, and so that way you get a verifiable data that what you are getting is actually correct. And then you actually develop the job description and job specifications, and we'll talk about those today, what they look like, and how those are kind of done. Any questions so far? Cool. I like the thumbs up. Of course, before you can get into a job analysis, you have to do workflow analysis. Like in my earlier restaurant example, you have to understand the work, kind of how it goes, who is going to do what before something else needs to happen, etc., etc. And so you have to understand the workflow. There is this pile of work that needs to be done, and it's just to understand sort of the flow of that work, the sequences, and then how you're going to kind of slice that work into these little things called jobs. So that has to be kind of thought through. And then, of course, decisions have to be made about sort of hierarchies, who's sort of above who, and who is kind of not only just paid more than somebody else because the job requires more skill sets, but also supervisory relationships. Who is responsible supervising who, and how does that kind of make sense? So you do this kind of a thing, and this may be difficult for you to see depending on how big your computer screen is, but it's just kind of shows that you have line managers who give you information input, like from a plan manager, and then you have components input from suppliers, give you some understanding of what type of components you are working with, what the information you are working with, and then that leads to the analysis of the job understudy, which in this case is a quality control clerk. And then you are also looking at the information output to plan manager, requiring the component quality and product quality output to plan manager. So obviously for any job that is under the study, this kind of flow would look very, very different. But this would be kind of an example, and in my opinion, not very good example. But anyway, it's an attempt of an example of how that kind of works. There are many type of processes that are also involved in job analysis, because like I said earlier, jobs do change all the time. And so they use fancy words like, or re-engineering, process engineering, restructuring is, other aspect of that. And, there are little bit nuances of which one is sort of a more involved process. Re-engineering is a very, very involved process. If you restructure organization, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're changing the jobs. You're just kind of changing the hierarchical structure and sort of supervisory relationships. But the jobs themselves don't necessarily change, but re-engineering is a much more involved and much more dramatic type of thing that you do. And that involves job redesign, where you basically say, this old job description is no longer good. You have to redesign it, and you have to write new job description. And that can be very, very difficult for people, because the things that they have been doing every day for a long time now are changing, and now they have to be doing some other things and learn different things. So change is anxiety provoking to people. So that may be hard for a lot of people, but sometimes it has to be done for a lot of reasons. Job enlargement is basically giving you more tasks to do. If somebody's getting kind of bored at their job, they don't have enough work to do, you enlarge their jobs by giving them more of a same level type of jobs or type of tasks that they don't have any more authority over than they had other tasks. It's just more of different kinds of things to do. And so sometimes it's needed, and sometimes, people have to be, jobs sometimes need to be enlarged. Sometimes there has to be a job rotation. Sometimes it's because of shift type of work, or sometimes you want to increase people's job satisfaction by giving them sort of variability and experience different things. So you sort of rotate jobs, and you train different people to do different jobs, and then you kind of rotate them. You do this today, and you do that today, and then you switch, different week, and you do other things, and that can increase job satisfaction, and it can help with a lot of things, teamwork, people appreciating each other's skill sets because they're asked to do it themselves. And so that can be sometimes good. Job enrichment is very different from job enlargement, because job enrichment, you give people more autonomy and empower them to have more control or sort of a power over their own jobs. So you kind of delegate and say, look, figure it out yourself. I give you the power to figure your own job. Just do it the best way you know how to do, and I trust you, in that. So that's enrichment. So it's very different from enlargement, which is just giving somebody more work to do. So I hope that that makes sense. So boosting productivity. So how can you boost productivity through redesign? In a lot of different ways. Obviously you can. Sometimes it's by introducing new tools and techniques, new software, and so when you redesign the job, you was using different tools and different equipment, and previously the equipment may not have been as sophisticated or as good quality or effective, and so now by introducing kind of new tools, you're able to boost productivity by redesigning that job. So sometimes a redesign of jobs, sometimes it does result in right sizing or laying people off, and of course that's a negative thing to that employee who gets laid off. But from an organizational point of view, they are improving the technology, they are improving the techniques and ways they do things, involving better systems, automating things, and that's an improvement for them. But of course there are sometimes individuals who sort of kind of suffer from that. But you have to always remember that you're not doing these things just to please people. Of course it's important to try to be fair and equitable and treat your employees well. But business organizations are not social services agencies. You are not there to help the employees necessarily. You want them to have a job, but you also want to be profitable. And if there is a better way of doing it, and you don't need as many people to do it because you found a better way of doing it that is more efficient and more effective, then of course you're going to have to do it. And it is sad. So, for example, Microsoft Office. When Microsoft Office was launched around 95, when it came about, lots of people called secretaries lost their jobs, within the decade after that. Because now executives could actually write their own letters. They could actually read their own emails. They could actually do a lot of things that previously would require secretarial staff with typewriters and typing skills to go and do. And of course, in an executive side, now all of a sudden there was a new skill set that you needed as an executive, because you no longer could have a secretary, because now its expectation is that you're able to do those things yourself. So very much secretarial sort of layer in organization got reduced significantly. So in today's world, you don't find a lot of people with the title secretary. They are called different types of administrative aides or administrative personnel, administrative assistants, a lot of different types of titles that are used for people, and they do a lot of different variety of different things, not just simply typing or dictating. Executives would dictate on a dictaphone and they would throw the tape to the secretary and they would write letters, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So when you collect this job analysis information, and we are almost there before the break, so a couple of more minutes here. So I'm probably going to get a warning for 5-minute warning in a few. We got a 15-minute warning a minute ago. So we're going to take a small break in a couple of minutes here. How do you collect job analysis information? Things that you want to keep in mind is that it's always a joint effort. It's not just one person that is going to conduct this whole effort. It's a joint effort. It includes everybody, includes the employees, includes the supervisors, and you have to ask clear questions, and there has to be a clear process, because if you have this process and you communicate it well to people involved, then they understand what that information is used, and that there is no hidden agenda. You are not going to go tattletale to the people's supervisor and saying, use that information for performance evaluation or something like that. And that you always use several different methods. You don't just rely on one method alone, because asking one person isn't going to be sufficient, and just getting information from one method isn't going to be enough. So that's important. So let's talk about some of those methods just a little bit. Actually, make sure that we are going to the right direction here. So interview would be one way that you would conduct the job analysis. You ask the kind of questions that you typically ask is that, what type of tasks are conducted in this job? What type of equipment are used for this job? What type of skills are required to perform this job? So those are the kind of what type, what kind of questions. You're not asking who, you're asking what and how. And so again, it's not, how well are you doing this job? It's not what you're asking. You're asking what is required to do this job well. You use structured interviews, like I said before. If you are interviewing a number of people conducting that same, who hold that same job and do these same type of activities, you are asking the same questions from every one of them. Because if you're asking different questions and if you're asking them differently, then you're leading. And when you're leading somebody, you get, answers that you're looking for, and they not be the right answers. You're just fishing information because you have an, preconceived idea where you want to go for. So you don't want to allow that to happen. They have to be very structured. And of course, like I said earlier, interviews have pros and cons. One of them is the fact that people are not willing to tell the truth because they're worried about their own performance. Other is that they have preconceived ideas or old, this is the way we do things around, kind of ideas about how they are doing the job day to day, and what their impression of how the job should be done may be completely different than what the organization or the supervisors want the job to be, how they want the job to be done. And it's actually very, very interesting, how much difference there is. And so what you actually do find in a lot of organizations, that people do their jobs, but they figured out their own shortcuts and their own ways of getting the job done, and things that you didn't know that they're doing it that way. And some of them may be okay, and you want to find out best practices, and if jobs have changed and the person doing the job have adjusted and they figured out some ways to do it better, that's fine. But if the person is cutting corners and it's not good, then the opposite can also be the truth. So you do have to have some interview guidelines. Communication The guidelines should state that you have to clearly communicate, why you're doing it and what that information is used for, and that person's name is not going to be used in any kind of fashion. It's just the knowledge about the job that is important here, etc. This checklist that you can obviously use, and there is some questionnaires that have been developed by consulting companies, by universities, by a lot of different entities that can be used for most of the kind of jobs. They can be maybe tailored to that specific job, but there are tools out there that can be used. Obviously, pros and cons with that is that by having somebody having done the structured questionnaire for you, you don't have to spend the time and money to develop it, but you get what you pay for, right? It could be generic, and it could not actually take into consideration the nuances that are involved with your specific context for that job. So that's sort of important, as well. Observation, we talked about that. Some jobs are more observable than others. So it's not very appropriate to observe things if the job requires a lot of mental activity that cannot be observed. You cannot go into a person's brain and study their brain and a mental activity. So type of jobs like somebody doing research, all you can tell is that they have in a book in their hand, or they are reading a computer screen. You really don't easily see what it is that they're actually doing. And in order to understand what they're doing, you would have to have same level of expertise to really do analyze what's going on there. And so that's important as well. And reactivity is an other way to say that there's a half-horn effect in place. I may have mentioned this before, but the half-horn effect is basically this idea that when you start studying something, everything changes. When people know that they are being observed, they react to it and they change their behavior. So now people are going to be performing their job in the best possible way that they always would do it, because you're observing it. And they would maybe not do things that they every day do or normally would do. They're just doing it right now because they know you're observing them. So that can be a problem with observations as well. So diaries, logs, to record certain kind of activities can be used as well when they are required to say, okay, well, record everything that you're doing, put the activity out there, write about it and whatever. These are clunky only because they take a lot of time. And of course, people can be writing their subjective experiences and not necessarily be super objective. Pocket dictating machines, you could record people's activities literally by having a, recorder in their pocket as they're doing the job, or having a, cameras and recording as they're doing the job. But again, those are types of things where people can embellish, and people's behavior may change when they are explaining to the dictaphone, what it is that they're doing, kind of thing. So you can readily see that there is no real perfect way of doing job analysis. There are all these different kind of common sense things, the ways, you ask people, you observe them, you ask them to record and write about how they do their jobs. You can do these kinds of things, but you have to do all of them together, and you have to do them creatively and create honesty and trust around it. So I mentioned this already. Position analysis questionnaire, these quantitative measures. Department of Labor procedure. Department of Labor, they have their own, figured out how they kind of do job analysis, and they have their own philosophy about it. It may or may not work for your scenario, but it's something that is out there. And everybody doing job analysis should certainly look into this and understand them as examples because they could be something useful that you could learn from them. Online job analysis, standardized job analysis questions, geographically dispersed in employees. For example, if you have a lot of people working remotely as distant employees, you're going to have to use these online job analysis questionnaires because you can't travel to everybody's location. So you have to rely on these kind of tools. The problem is that, you don't control the environment in which the person answers the questionnaire. And depending on what mood they are in and what situation and environment they are in when they answer the questions may also vary the answers quite a bit. So again, there are a lot of pros and cons and problems with each of those. Okay, well, we're probably going to get cut off in a minute over here. So let's have a 15-minute break. Come back here. Well, it's 11:01 over here in Central Standard Time. So it's the top of the hour wherever you're at. So if you be back 15 after, 16 after, I have posted a link in announcement for the next. So we are using a different link because it's another hour and this only gives us an hour. And so I will also share that link in WhatsApp right now. And so I'll see you in 15 minutes because they have to be across the board. So it should be something that should be asked by everybody, in my opinion.
Thank you, Tomi.
Yep. And by the way, any questions, you know where to find me, and I'll give you resources and help or whatever on these things. So don't be shy. You can find me through WhatsApp, through my personal phone number. Text me and ask me if you are in the United States, then long distance calls don't cost you anything, typically if you're using a cell phone, so it doesn't matter. But if you are overseas, use WhatsApp, and you know how to get a hold of me, so no worries. Okay, let's move forward. This is a little bit more sort of a, nuts and bolts, how to write job descriptions. But it's important because, again, the real world is, and I've been a consultant a long time, and I don't like to talk about myself. It's not about that. It's just giving you a kind of perspective that I've been in positions to see how other organizations don't do things really well. And so I have seen a variety of different kinds of job descriptions, and don't really think that I've ever seen any organization, that would have written a perfect job description. I mean, I guess it's probably not even possible to write perfect, but everybody has room for improvement. And so, and it all depends on organizational culture and style and everything as well. But it's kind of like we were talking about APA format. If everybody would follow the same format in job descriptions, it would be sort of easier for everybody. So these are some sections that you want to have in your job description. So we'll talk about some of these sections here. Job identification. Every job has to be identified with sort of job code, job category, EEO category, all of different kinds of exempt, non-exempt, those types of legalese, the formalities of the job. So you need to have that sort of in the top section, all of the identification in information there. And there are a lot of different things that you could include there. You could even include Department of Labor Statistics job code there. If you're following, those kinds of pre-made job descriptions, you certainly want to involve a date when it was reviewed the last time out there, so that you can keep track of these things. So job identification section has to be there. Job summary, general summary of what the job is all about. We'll go into examples of how it would look like. You want to be specific, but not too specific, because with all of these, if you get too specific and start including every single little nuance, then what's also going to happen is that when you change something, then you have to change every single nuance. So that becomes sort of problematic, as well. So you do want to have a happy sort of balance between not being overly general, but general in the sense that you don't have to change every sentence when you have to make revisions. And same thing applies to responsibilities and duties. You want to think, forward, and you want to think in the future that if you have to make amendments, changes, revisions, that you want to make it easy to do so. That makes sense, right? Authority of that incumbent, of that person that is doing that job. What kind of authority do they have? Do they supervise anybody? Chain of command, who they, where they are, kind of an organizational structure, and what kind of authority is given to them, and how detailed that is, again, depends kind of on a job situation and a lot of different factors. Standards of performance, are important to put out here. Not, again, to the point, this is not like you're going to put everything in a performance appraisal form here, but general metrics, general performance expectations that are going to be measured, so that the person from the get-go, because this will be one of the first documents that they will receive when they start a new job. And so from that date forward, well, actually even before that, the first, when the socialization into a new company starts, is when person first reads that job announcement in wherever, job board, LinkedIn, wherever they apply for the job. That is going to be their first impression of you as a company. And if you really want to keep a professional impression, then you want to make sure that that job announcement is well written, specific. And if that person reads and say, oh, I understand exactly what this job is all about. Now I know what I'm applying for, and I have an opportunity to really, in my cover letter and my resume, to really fine tune it. That really, really sort of helps. And so, job description is where the job announcement is created from. So the standards of performance are really important there. Working conditions, obviously. People need to know if there's heavy lifting involved, if there is, any dangerous substances involved, any dangerous environmental conditions, any type of other types of factors out there. They sort of need to know those things. And of course, regular office jobs, these are not very, very important, but they are, hospital jobs, they are manufacturing jobs where a lot of these hazardous materials conditions really are sort of important to be listed. And then job specifications. And these are now more about the person than about the job. These are more, what does it take to do this job well? What type of knowledge, skills, and abilities is required from the person doing this job to do the job well? And this is, of course, very, very useful for the job announcement when you do recruitment and selection, because these are the kinds of things that you would list there, that this is the kind of person that, you're looking for that position. So this is sort of how job identification section would look like. You hopefully would not misspell a job title like it is misspelled in this example. So that's kind of funny. Representative, that's obviously an extra S there. So you want to be make sure that you do not misspell things here. Job code should be there. Recommended salary grade, it's blank over here, but you would have something there. Sort of job family, what is it? Generally, this is a sales job, so you'd have a job family type of a code. You can find job family identifications from ONET and from Department of Labor Statistics, dls.gov website. So, there are some general job family categories that can be used. EEOC typically has certain classifications for the type of workers that different positions would fall out under. So you would put that on there, as well. Division, well, this would be, seems like this is a job that would be telesales, edutech type of a sales position. So this would be in a higher education division, meaning that their customers. They are selling to higher education audience. And, this is a sales job reporting to district sales manager. You can find that there. It's an in-house sales, so it's a business-to-business type of job. I guess they have out-house sales too in other departments. So whatever your divisions and departments are, that's where it's put. And then, of course, the location and the date that this job description is written. Location could say remote if this is a remote position. So this is how job summary would look like. The person in this position is responsible for selling college textbooks, software, and multimedia products to professors via incoming and outgoing telephone calls, blah, 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 blah. So this is gives a person a very, very good understanding of what this job is all about, what it is that the person in this job would be doing. How long you want this to be depends, of course, completely the type of a job, how complex it is, and that's what I've said. That is there. There's no perfection here. There's no necessarily rule of thumb and any guidelines necessarily. Although you can certainly find examples of guidelines, but there's no universal agreement of exactly how this should read because there's different kind of companies, different kinds of jobs. But it should be, again, comprehensive, but not excessively detailed, because you have to anticipate that one day you may be able to change something, may need to change something, and that's why you want to leave some room for changes there. Relationships, should be the next section there. Inside and outside the organization. So you saw this example. If you go back to that, it talks about selling college textbooks. It talks about the actual task, but it's also talking about who the outside, so smaller colleges and universities, and then will be generating designated. So it talks about the task, but it also talks about the relationships, like who that person would be. The summary doesn't tell who the reports to, but in the summary you would often mention some relationship inside and outside organization, and then you would specify them more in detail over here. Who that person supervises, who that person works with, and who that person sort of interacts with outside the company. That's sort of important. Many positions these days, they have certain business development responsibility embedded to them, so that if you are a consultant, for example, you want to put out there that the consultants are expected to also do business development and interact with the potential clients outside the company, as well as obviously with the actual clients. So you want to kind of specify, that prospective clients and existing clients and, whatever it would be. So again, it depends on the job. And that's when you start then getting to responsibilities and duties. And there is a long list of these here. So you want to list them in order of importance. And in this particular situation, so 60% would be driving sales. Well, it's a sales job, so 60% would be that. But what does that mean? So you would write over here, achieve quantitative sales goal by assigning territory, smaller colleges and universities, determine sales priorities, strategies for territory, develop a plan for implementing those strategies. It's important to put out here if you are expected to just follow orders, or if you are expected to kind of also like develop your own plans. So this sort of authority, and how much, when we talked about job enrichment, how much authority you have to decide how you do the job. This is a good place to kind of define that a little bit. And I would not advise to put sort of numerical quotas over here. Conduct 15 to 20 professor interviews per day. I think that's a bad idea. But if that's needed, that's needed. But I would stay away from that just because your sales quotas and numbers change depending on, your profitability and conditions and whatever. And so you want to stay away from quantitative quotas over here. But if you feel like it's important to put a general idea of 15 to 20 interviews per day so that you can give that person an idea of the kind of amount of work involved, it kind of does make a little bit of sense, I guess. So you want to specify what the products are, over here, text, software, website, those tools and materials that you use to conduct your presentations. Again, effectively articulate our central vision of key titles. We don't need to overthink this because this is about this specific job, and every job is of course different, but it kind of shows the level of detail that is good to put out here. Although there are different maybe opinions on this or different styles, I personally prefer job description to be a little bit more generic and not quite this detailed as this example puts it. So listing a really, really long list of sort of tasks and expectations over here, responsibilities and duties. The problem with them, again, is that more you list everything, more there is sort of an expectation that it all has to be listed there. And so more people are going to turn around and say, well, it's not in my job description. And you never want an employee to turn around and say, well, I don't have to do that. That's not my job description. And so you do want people to kind of be thinking and looking around what needs to be done and feeling the needs of the organization rather than just following what's in a job description. So that's also kind of an important kind of way to look at this. And so again, there's nuances, there's different ways to do it, there's different style to do that. It's kind of like employee handbooks. It's some companies have really detailed employee handbooks of do's and don'ts. And some companies, Nordstrom is a good example. Nordstrom department store's handbook, employee handbook, only has one sentence, and it states, use your best judgment. They hire people based on their ability to understand what is the best judgment of providing good customer care. Now, just because they say use your best judgment doesn't mean that they don't provide excessive training so that people know exactly what that means. But there's again different ways that companies are doing this. And this is where best practices and benchmarking, we talked about benchmarking earlier. This is where you study other companies, and this is where you understand how other companies are doing this so that you can kind of copy them a little bit. Sample products, closed class test adoptions, negotiate custom publishing. So this is clearly just selling textbook software and website resources to professors. So this would be a typical, that would be the nature of this job. So the point is that when you read all of these responsibilities and duties, you get a really, really good idea of the day-to-day activities and what the person is responsible for and what type of things they're supposed to be doing, so that there isn't really any confusion at all, about what it is that the person should be doing. And again, if they are expected to plan or develop, initiate, those kind of words are used out there a lot. There is something in academia that we use called Bloom's taxonomy. And so when we write learning objectives for an academic course, there's always on the top of the syllabus there are learning objectives. We use these terms called Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy can be used also in job descriptions. And when you are using words like initiate or plan or develop, they're like higher level skills than if you would be just asked to kind of follow orders, execute, implement what is being told to you, obviously. So those would be kind of indications that the type of jobs when you are given an authority and there's an expectation for you to kind of develop and plan something, there are higher level jobs that typically get paid a little bit more than just something that, is just expected to follow orders kind of a thing. Let me read what the comment here. Sometimes in interviews, the interviewer will look at particular leadership skills such as ownership, bias, action, and customers, and not only technical. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, leadership skills. I mean, obviously, not all jobs require leadership, but you could also argue that all jobs require leadership because there are different levels of leadership, and I think we talked about this, in the beginning in the first session, that you can be a leader without being a manager, but you can't be a manager without being a leader. And so, even if a person is not in a managerial position, doesn't mean that there's not some leadership, skills there. And by the way, there's also such a thing called self-leadership. We don't talk about that often, but we are all responsible for our own self-leadership, leading ourselves, taking responsibility for ourselves, and so that's kind of type of ownership as well. So yeah, that's a good comment. Thank you for that, Mohammed. So yeah.
And Tomi, I have a question also.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you are having interview,
yes,
you will ask how much salary you expected. Is that relevant for this HRM course?
That's a very, very tricky question, right? So obviously salary is important, but it's typically recommended that in interviews you don't get into salary. You discuss the salary when you are ready to make an offer, but at the same time, in your job description, your job announcement, you should have a salary range. And when you are selecting your applicants, you do want to ask them what their minimal salary requirement is. In other words, you want to get it settled in a very, very early in a process. Not settled in the sense that the exact number what somebody's going to get paid, but you want to have an understanding that you're in a ballpark. Because if you don't, you may be doing all of this work for nothing, and then in the end it turns out that the person is not willing to accept the salary that you are willing to pay, or capable of paying, able to pay. So it's a tricky thing. As a person interviewing for the job, you do not want to lead with the salary. You do not want to first go and say, how much is this pay? You want to
just because we know that we have a salary range, like a minimum and a maximum.
Right. Yeah, and see some states like California, you cannot put a job announcement without the range, and then some other jobs. Some other states you don't have to include it. So there's nuances of that as well. Mohammed, you have a raised hand.
Yes, Professor. So there are many websites which will give you a range of the salary per job, even if you want to research the company itself. So I'm applying for this company and this job level.
Yeah.
Sorry, my alarm went off. I will continue in a few seconds.
Yeah, I'll open the door. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, sorry. My wife can't open the door, so yeah. Well,
I mean, Glassdoor, they give you a pretty much accurate salary range. So if you are applying for a job, you need to do your homework and get the salary range for this job. And sometimes the interviewer will give you a range. Okay, so we are paying for this job from 70K to 90K. And I think it's better to discuss the details once they offer you the job.
Maybe
Yes.
that's for contract.
Well, I mean, by the way, that's a good discussion because, of course, that's why you want to make sure that you're specifying in your sub identification the category, that is exempt or non-exempt. So you want to make sure that there's an understanding that is an hourly pay, or this is a salary job, or this is W-2 or 1099. In other words, contract work versus salary, employee work. So all of that should be right on the top before you even get into anything else, so that's all understood, how the person is going to get paid, because that's very, very important. Contract work is very, very different than being an employee. And also the term, is this a temporary, short-term, long-term type of position? So all of that should be, because that all plays into what the salary should be, or wages, depending on whether it's hourly or monthly, annual, type of compensation. So, but also remember that there's so much more that goes into compensation than, and we'll talk about that later on. But it's not just the money. The money is called direct compensation, and then everything else that is non-monetary is called non-direct, compensation or indirect compensation. Benefits, medical benefits, any kind of non-monetary types of things. So Europe, for example, executives would be paid relatively lower salaries, but there would be a lot more perks. They would get, company car, company apartment, certain things. Reason why it's done that way in Europe is because it's a way of avoid taxation, or to make it better for the employee as a taxation wise. And so those are nuances as well. Retirement plan, paid time off is that's salary, that's money. I mean, somebody gives you 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, vacation time. That's compensation. That's money that the company is going to have to pay for you not to be there. So the direct compensation, the actual money that you receive, is typically only about 70% of your total compensation. And so again, there's a lot that goes into this that needs to be discussed. And if you get in the weeds of discussing this too early, it gives an impression that all you care about is money. From an applicant's perspective, you don't want the company to think that all you care about is money. Obviously, it's given that you work to earn money, but you want them to feel like you are willing to work hard, and you have organizational citizenship behaviors, and that all of those kinds of. And so yeah, if that makes sense. Ahmed, go ahead.
Hi, Professor. My question is that sometimes in the interview, the interviewers may ask you, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
Right.
And don't you consider this also like as a tricky question?
Well, yeah, it is. It's a very common question. And you do kind of want to ask that, because what that asks is your level of ambition. Many times companies don't hire you just to fill a position. They hire you because they want to keep you in a company for longer periods of time. And so there's a difference between filling a job or hiring somebody for a career. Career is a sequence of jobs. And, if somebody says, I want to get this job, and, I want to just, this is all I want to do for the rest of my life, that may not be, depending on your situation, the kind of person you want to hire, because you may want that person to grow with the company, and that may be, your thinking, in terms of career development perspective. So yes, you want you want the person to tell you where they want to be 5 years from now, because it gives a sense of where you're going with that employee. That's very important. It also gives idea about the, like I said, ambition, the attitude towards personal growth, professional growth. Is this a person who wants to be stagnated and is just going to be where they are for the rest of their life, versus is this a person who's going to be competing for some leadership positions later on? So what the correct answer to that is depends on a lot of different factors, but those are typical types of questions that are being asked. The type of questions that should be asked in interviews, first of all, they all have to be 100% performance, job related. You cannot ask anything that is not job related. And you want to ask what is called behaviorally anchored questions, behavioral interview questions. You want to ask things like, well, give me an example of when you managed a conflict situation particularly well in the past. That would be a good kind of question. Give me an example how you, whatever. I mean, how you faced a particular difficult situation. Give me an example of how you, if you're a salesperson, how you closed a really important client and really important, sales deal. How did you manage to do that? So you want people to talk about the achievements, the accomplishments in an exact, concrete behavioral terms. You never want to ask people yes and no questions, closed-end questions. You want to ask them open-ended questions. You want to encourage them to elaborate, because everybody's going to go into interview practiced. They're all going to put their best suit on, and they're going to look the way they expect the employer to want to see them in that situation. That doesn't mean that they're going to be every day that way. It's just they're practiced and they're going to be prepared for the interview. And so you want to kind of sort of not trick them, but you want to put them in a situation where they are kind of at ease, and that they have to talk about those kind of real things. That's why lots of companies have these unique things like asking somebody to sing in the middle of an interview or something like that. Now that's kind of goofy, and not many companies do creative things like that, but some do. Mark Zuckerberg, that the story goes that if you go to interview for a position where you actually end up interviewing with Mark directly, he'll take you hiking. There's a little forest next to Facebook headquarters, and there's a hiking trail, and so he take you out for hiking. And the reason why he takes you out for hiking and talks, ask interview questions that way, is because when you're walking side by side with somebody in a walking trail, you kind of feel like opening up. Now all of a sudden you're feeling like you're talking to a friend, and that's when people really open up. And so you want the person in an interview to show their true self and not just practiced kind of answers, because everybody can read a book of how to interview well, and people do. And so it's not an easy kind of a thing. You wanna ask, at the same time you don't want to ask any personal questions. So you want to make sure that they talk about their true self without asking any personal questions. So it's tricky. But everything that you're asking has to be connected to your job analysis and your job description, and somehow that if anybody ever challenges you legally, you can say, well, you asked those questions because of they were specific to this job. But again, money talk in most cultures is considered a little bit distasteful. And if you start talking about money too early, it may cost you that job. That maybe they think that you are just all about money and you are not, really, you don't have other motivations in life. Except if you are, working, for Wall Street, and your job literally is to sell stocks and it's all about money. Well, then you'll turn around and maybe that's the most important thing that you want to talk about, because it's all about money. And so the earning goals and whatever becomes part of the kind of, standards for the job. So again, it depends. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. And Tomi, is also, if you are the HR to interview applicant, is it proper to give assurance to them if they are hired or no instantly, so that the applicant cannot go anywhere to find another job or find some interview? Because mostly, yes, we keep on waiting for them.
Well, you are almost never in a position that you can tell a person right at the end of the interview saying you're hired. And the reason you are not in that position is that you typically have not done your due diligence yet. And so if the person, if the recommendation is made that that person is going to be hired, then typically the line manager or the person who conducted the interview, if it's one person or group of people, they're going to communicate that decision to Human Resources Department. And the Human Resources Department is then going to go and check references and certain kinds of other things, that because they're not going to necessarily go through the time and effort of checking. Well, not necessarily. They communicate to you in advance and they say, we will not check your references before we are ready to make an offer, because they also don't want you to alienate yourself in your existing job, by alerting your existing current employer that you are looking for a job. So you're almost never in a position where you can say you're hired right away. And you don't want the salary discussion to be between the line manager and the employee. You want that to be handled by Human Resources Department, because the Human Resources Department is then going to go and explain the employee benefits and all of that and put it all in sort of perspective. And you don't want it to be kind of back and forth, a negotiation of the salary, because what happens is that if you are the supervisor and you get into that conversation with the employee and it becomes combative, it becomes a negotiation that becomes uncomfortable, then right off the bat, you lost sort of rapport with that employee. So you almost never have that opportunity to make the job offer right away, and you kind of shouldn't. Now that doesn't mean that you can't turn around and tell HR to say make an offer immediately, and sort of within hours, you could check some references quickly or whatever. If you are afraid of losing that candidate to somebody else. Muhammad, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Tomi.
Yeah, and there are like some practices in like most of the corporations right now. So the hiring manager will not attend the interview. So there will be a recruiter, from the HR side, and there will be an interviewer, which will be from the same business unit or a different team.
Yeah.
And after they interview all candidates, they should have a kind of debrief. So they have to meet and debrief with the hiring manager, and whoever is inclined for the job, the hiring manager vote will be a plus.
Yes.
So and this process is just to control the bias. So just in case if I have a friend applying for this job and I'm the hiring manager,
yes,
so I cannot control my bias to hire my friend.
Correct.
So to control this and to make it like fair for everyone, the interview board should be different than. So I mean, the hiring manager shouldn't be included in the interview process. After the interview process is done, they will review the candidates and see how they were ranked. And then if let's say there are like 5 people inclined for the job, it's the sole right for the hiring manager to pick one of them, and there is no justification required as long as they already cleared the interview.
Correct. Yes. Very, very good points. Thank you. And also, Omer, you were saying, is there a specific standard for the interview panel? So this is why we have structured interviews, that you decide who's going to ask what, and you structure it, and you ask all questions, same questions from every candidate in the same order and same way, to eliminate the bias and so forth. And yes, many organizations and many jobs, they don't have the supervisor, the line supervisor involved in all in the decision, because they want it to be super objective. And so they would have a search committee, there's a committee of people that is, are going to be chosen for this particular job, and it's going to be shared by a person who is typically not the hiring manager or the line manager, and this search committee is going to conduct a search. They're going to conduct the interview and then questions, and they're going to submit their recommendation to HR and the line manager. And depending on a lot of factors, the supervisor, the line manager may or may not be in a position of saying yes or no. Maybe they are the final decision maker, maybe they're not. Human resources department does not make the decision. They just do their due diligence to make sure that everything is done correctly. So yes, very good points. I mean, these are definitely important considerations, and so yeah, absolutely. I mean, the decision can be, and I think this is a best practice. Now, on the other side of it, if you have a search committee, you can say, well, do the search committee people really know what the job entails? And like I said earlier, are you just choosing certain people to be in a search committee just for sort of organizational political reason to kind of have representation from everybody? So, for example, if you're hiring an administrator for a university, and you have a student representative, in the search committee, now the question is, why do you need a student representative, for an administrative position? Because that person may probably not even interact with the students ever. Well, you're doing that because you want the student body to feel comfortable about the decisions that the university makes. And so you hire a provost or president, you want the students to feel comfortable who that person is, because although you don't interact with that person daily, it gives them confidence and faith on the organization. So there are lots of considerations and lots of issues and to really consider. So very good points. So again, decision-making responsibilities for the position, you want to put those in the job description out there, make sure that those are outlined very clearly. You want to look at those things. Now, social media is interesting because it has made things very different. Now, because of social media, line managers are able to learn about different positions, different job titles, and a lot of different things easier. They have become more familiar about what HR does and does not do and everything. Before social media and internet and all of that, line managers were not really as savvy about what goes on out there in terms of HR, because they wouldn't necessarily read HR specific literature, and wouldn't be easy for them to access that. But right now, in like LinkedIn, any one of us, going in LinkedIn, you can see people's position titles from other companies and whatever. And so if you're a line manager and you are networking with your colleagues and whatever out there, you can see a variety of different job titles, and you may be tempted and say, well, let me use that job title for a position in my company. And so, you have line managers now having a lot more opinions on this than HR. And so the partnering, HR partnering with line managers has become even more important, because in both sides, HR now has to have more business and strategic understanding, but line managers also have to have more HR understanding. So it goes both ways. ADA, we talked about that in chapter 2, laws, equal employment opportunity, and 88, and all of these. You do have to make sure that you list all of those requirements in your job descriptions. What are the reasonable accommodations that can be given? If are you encouraging handicapped employees to apply for a job? And if so, what type of handicaps would be impossible to perform the job? So like physical, if somebody's in a wheelchair and the job requires type of things that carrying physically things, and obviously you have to make it specific there. So you do have to make sure that you do not violate, ADA, Americans Disabilities Act, in your hiring practices, and so you specify those in there. And finally, list the standards for working conditions. Mentioned that already earlier, but yeah, I mean, what are the standards of performance? What do we expect? What level of performance? What the metrics are? What the working conditions are? You want to list those out there. ONET is a really, really good resource. There's ONET online. If you go, Google, ONET will give you lots of different job descriptions on almost any job. So if you are unsure about how you would go about writing a job description, you can go and get that information from ONET, and ONET will give you sample job descriptions. And it's a government website that they created exactly for the reason of helping HR professionals and line managers to do these things. So using ONET is definitely a best practice. Benchmarking, it gives us an idea of how other companies are doing it and how to, and it's open to everybody. You can go online and you can get information from there. So that is a definitely best practice out there. So how do you, when you use ONET, just copy and paste something from ONET. You review your own plan and you develop your own organizational chart, and you use these job analysis questionnaires that we talked about before, whether you're going to create your own or use one off the shelf. You want to go through that process, and then you obtain the job duties from ONET to do a kind of comparison. So you are able to, adjust or revise the ONET job description according to your kind of own information that you've done through your own job analysis. So don't just go to ONET without doing your own job analysis. That's basically what I'm saying. And, but you combine, you use it, to help with your final job description to make sure that you are, writing it correctly. Job specifications are those human traits and experiences that are required to do this job, effectively. How much education you are required to have, how many years of experience in something, what kind of skill sets, what kind of KSAs. So that's the part of the job description that, again, is very important in the job announcement, because that's how people know what they need to have in order to qualify for the job. But that is called job specifications. And so that's part of job analysis, but it's not the job requirements. Those are specifications of what you need to have in order to meet those requirements. And so there's a little bit of nuance there. So that tells you what kind of a person you want to recruit for the job and what qualities that person should have. And of course, those are what you use in interviewing. And so that's what guides you, what kind of structured interviews you conduct. Now, it's much easier to write job specification for jobs that require trained personnel, because if you want to hire an engineer, it's easier to say the person is required to have a master's degree in engineering. It's because there's an expectation that there's an established standard of training that meets that job. But if that sort of established training standard doesn't exist, it becomes much more difficult to list the expectation. So in those cases, for untrained people, you have to go ahead and you have to specify those qualities yourself, because you can't just say, certain degree is required. Now, to make it easy for themselves, many companies these days, they say bachelor's degree required. And it's not that it's really required, but by requiring a bachelor's degree, they don't have to list that critical thinking required, writing skills, communication skills, certain things that you need to have acquired to get a bachelor's degree. It's sort of given. So rather than sort of listing all of those qualities, they just say bachelor's degree degree required. And we talked about this before, how that's a tricky business, because if you go out there and you don't, sort of be careful with that, you can actually, make it discriminatory, because, you are requiring a bachelor's degree for no other reason other than to exclude minorities who are not as likely to be college graduates. So this is where things get a little tricky. It would be very tempting to say, yeah, it's better for somebody to have a bachelor's degree, but wait a minute, we do really need to justify that as well. So you can't sort of write these specifications based on sort of educated guesses. They have to be sort of specific. And so you really have to be able to ask yourself a question: what does it take in terms of education, intelligence, training, and the like to do this job well? And of course, kind of using common sense. I mean, if you are looking for somebody who to do, a lot of physical labor, why would you ask for a college degree? I mean, it's common sense. They don't need that. They need their hands. They don't need, necessarily. But, common sense is always not common. So you can do statistical analysis on sub-specifications. There's all kinds of way of analyzing, what type of behaviors predict other kind of behaviors and outcomes, and what kind of criterion you're using, what criterion are related to, so you could do correlation analysis, regression analysis. There's a 5-step procedure. And so, that would be more of a scientific sort of 5-step scientific reasoning kind of approach. And a lot of companies don't go to this level with it. But if you really want to go get to that level, you kind of could, to determine what behaviors are more likely to generate certain, results and outcomes. So you can create these kind of job requirements matrices. It would be sort of a more complete description of what the worker does and how and why he or she does it, and so kind of explains a person why they need to have these skills in order to do this and so forth. This is where things are going, I think, trend-wise. We are using big data and using quantitative analysis to kind of come up with these kind of correlational kind of statistical analysis and create these job requirements matrices, and then they are fed to artificial intelligence based on kind of job search machine, and it automatically kind of searches these things and sort of resumes and whatever. So there's a lot that goes behind the scenes, which is important to remember, that if you are searching for a job, don't take any of it personally. If you get rejected and don't get the job, there could be 1,000 reasons for you not getting the job that have nothing to do with you. They just have to do with the algorithms. They have to do with what they're looking for in resume and things like that. And they're just very nuanced. And so your guesses of what it would take to do that job well may not be accurate at all. They may have completed their own way of measuring things, and the job may be very different that you think that it is. So, it's only way to describe it is that it's complicated. Really, it's not simple stuff. You want to make sure that you give people opportunities to get engaged. We talked about engagement being this kind of psychological component of not just doing the job, but actually wanting to do the job and being psychologically engaged. So there are studies that have been done of development dimensions that sort of look at personal characteristics that seem to predict the likelihood that somebody would be more engaged and somebody would not be more engaged. So there's some interesting studies out there. The Big Five personality theory model is pretty well supported, that you want people to have a certain level of agreeableness, certain level of extroversion, and low level of neuroticism, and those sort of things that are pretty well supported, that there's an idea of what a good worker in general looks like. And if you are looking for a job, you certainly want to understand those things, because then you can mold yourself to be that way. If you are interviewing, you want to know those kinds of things so that you're looking for those kind of characteristics. And if they are scientifically, through statistical quantitative analysis, they are supported, it's hard to argue against them. We have only a few minutes left over here. Competence-based job analysis is based on Society for Human Resource Management, a body of competency and knowledge.